I never considered you my mother." These 5 words came out of my son Elijah's mouth with a chill that froze my blood as I stood in the center of my own living room, surrounded by family members who had just witnessed the most brutal humiliation of my life. 71 years old, and my own son had just erased me from his history right in front of everyone. The silence that followed was deafening. My daughter-in-law, Tiffany, smiled with a satisfaction that turned my stomach. The rest of the family members looked away, ashamed by the cruelty they had just witnessed. But Elijah held my gaze, challenging me, daring me to contradict him. It had all started when I asked, with the humility that defines me, to be included in the decision about the upcoming family vacation. It wasn't a demand. It was a silent plea from a mother who only wanted to feel like part of the family she had built with her own 2 hands. But to him, my request was an unforgivable intrusion. "You don't have the right to an opinion on our plans," he had told me, his eyes full of contempt. "You're just the woman who brought me into the world, nothing more, a stranger who insists on meddling in my life." The words hit me like invisible punches. 45 years after giving birth to him, after nursing him with my own milk, after working double shifts to pay for his college education, after selling my wedding ring to help buy his first home, my son was denying me as his mother. Tiffany moved closer to him and whispered something in his ear. He nodded and continued. "Mom is confused. She thinks she has some kind of authority over us just because she birthed me, but that doesn't give her rights over my family." My family. As if I wasn't part of it. As if 45 years of sacrifice, unconditional love, sleepless nights when he had a fever, and days without eating so that he could have food on the table meant absolutely nothing. The guests, uncomfortable, began to gather their belongings. No one knew what to say. No one knew how to react to such a display of filial cruelty. My younger sister, Brenda, tried to approach me, but Elijah stopped her with an icy stare. "I think it's better if Mom leaves. She's ruining my celebration with her tantrums." Tantrums. That's what my son called the deepest humiliation I had ever experienced. I stood there feeling every pair of eyes watching me with pity. The same pity you feel for a wounded animal, for something that is no longer useful, for someone who is simply in the way. I walked toward my room with the dignity I had left. But before leaving the living room, I turned to look at him one last time. In his eyes, there was no pain, no guilt, not even anger. There was indifference. The same indifference you have toward an old piece of furniture that is no longer needed, toward a wilting houseplant, toward something that is simply a bother. That night, lying in bed, I understood something that would change everything. My son had not spoken out of anger. He had spoken the truth. To him, I truly had never been his mother. And the worst part was that I had been so blind, so desperate to keep my family together, that I hadn't realized that to him, I was invisible. But something inside me, something that had been dormant for decades, began to wake up. A voice that told me this couldn't stand, that a mother isn't erased from a son's history without consequences, that the time had come for Elijah to learn who Grace Sterling really was. The next day, while he and his wife slept in the master bedroom of my house, I dialed a number I hadn't called in years. It was time for my son to know the truth about many things I had kept secret for too long. While I waited for my call to be answered, my mind began to replay all the moments when I should have realized what was happening. The signs had been there for years, but I had chosen to ignore them, justify them, forgive them. Now, with my heart still bleeding from Elijah's words, every memory became crystal clear. Last year, when I turned 70, I waited all day for a call that never came. The next day, when I finally contacted him, he told me he had been too busy with work. But that very afternoon, I saw on Tiffany's social media the photos of an elegant dinner they had with their friends while I spent my birthday alone. They were celebrating with strangers. 2 months later, I found out by chance that they had christened my granddaughter Zoe without inviting me. My sister Brenda told me when we ran into each other at the local market. "How was the little one's christening?" she asked innocently. I froze. I didn't know what she was talking about. My own granddaughter had been christened, and I hadn't been invited to one of the most important moments of her life. When I confronted Elijah, he looked at me with that same coldness I now recognized. We forgot to tell you, Mom. It was a very intimate thing. Just close family. Close family. Apparently, the grandmother didn't qualify as close family. I remembered the Christmas before last. I had prepared my house for weeks. I had bought gifts for everyone. I had cooked for days on end. I waited until 10 o'clock that night. No one showed up. When I called, Tiffany answered the phone with a falsely sweet voice. "Oh, Mother Sterling, the day got complicated. Let's just reschedule for another time." There never was another time. But perhaps the most painful memory was the day I became seriously ill 6 months ago. I had to call an ambulance myself because I couldn't breathe. I spent 3 days in the hospital, and Elijah only visited me once for 20 minutes. I have a lot of responsibilities, Mom. I can't be here all the time like I'm a kid. However, when Tiffany caught the flu last month, he took a full week off work to care for her. He posted photos on social media, bringing her flowers, preparing soup, and accompanying her to the doctor. The difference was so obvious, it hurt. My granddaughter's birthday parties also became forbidden territory for me. The first few times, Elijah would tell me that the little girl was too young and the parties stressed her out. Later, when she grew up, the excuses changed. The food was too expensive for so many people, the venue was too small, or the other children didn't know me and would feel uncomfortable with an older lady present. But through the social media of the other guests, I would see the spectacular parties they organized. There were clowns, bounce houses, and tables laden with food. All the grandparents of the other kids were smiling in the photos. Everyone but me. The pattern was always the same. First came the exclusion, then came the justification, and finally came the blame directed at me. According to Elijah, I was too sensitive, too demanding, too nosy. If it hurt me not to be invited, it was because I didn't understand how complicated modern life was. If I asked why they didn't include me, it was because I was being a nuisance. Tiffany had perfected the art of subtle exclusion. When they planned family outings, they would talk about them in front of me, but as if I were invisible. "We're taking Zoe to the zoo this weekend," she would say. "It's going to be beautiful. It's been so long since we've done something as a family." And I would stand there listening, waiting for an invitation that never came. When I finally gathered the courage to ask if I could tag along, there was always a reason why it wasn't convenient. The car was too small. They were going to walk too much, and I would get tired, or it was too expensive to buy another ticket. But magically, there was always space and money for Tiffany's friends who decided to join at the last minute. The deepest pain came in the afternoons when I saw my granddaughter playing in the yard and went over to talk to her. The little girl spoke to me lovingly, but always ended up asking why I never went anywhere with them. "Why don't you come to the fun places, Grandma?" she would ask with that innocence only children possess. I didn't know how to answer her. How do you explain to a 5-year-old that her parents have decided her grandmother isn't important enough to be included in their lives? How do you tell her that the love she feels for you is not shared by the people who make the decisions in that house? Now, after hearing Elijah's words, everything made sense. It wasn't that they had forgotten to invite me. It wasn't that the situations were complicated. It was that to him, I had never been his mother, and therefore I didn't deserve to be treated as his daughter's grandmother. They had spent years building a family from which I was systematically excluded, and I had been too naive, too hopeful, too blind to see it. But not anymore. The call I had made still hadn't been answered, but something profound had shifted in me during that sleepless night. I sat by my bedroom window, watching the first light of dawn filter through the curtains that I myself had sewn years ago. Everything in that house carried my footprint, my labor, my dedication, and yet they had turned me into a stranger in my own home. From my window, I could see the garden I had cultivated for decades. Every rose, every herb bush, every fruit tree had been planted by my hands. I remembered how Elijah used to help me when he was little, how excited he would get when the first flowers bloomed in the spring. Now, that same garden was just the backdrop for family photos that I was absent from. I heard movement in the kitchen. It was Tiffany preparing breakfast. Not for me, of course. She never asked if I wanted anything to eat. She never made an extra cup of coffee. We lived in the same house, but she had managed to create a family bubble from which I was completely shut out. It was as if I were a ghost inhabiting the back rooms of a life that no longer belonged to me. I dressed slowly, every movement heavy with the realization of what I had been denying for years. It wasn't just that I was excluded from important events, it was that they had completely reconstructed the family structure without including me. I was the invisible grandmother, the uncomfortable mother-in-law, the mother who had been demoted to a tenant in her own house. I walked down the stairs and found Elijah eating breakfast while checking his phone. He didn't even look up when I entered the kitchen. Tiffany was preparing Zoe's lunch for school, humming a tune as if nothing had happened the night before, as if she hadn't just witnessed the most brutal humiliation a mother can experience. "Good morning," I said with a voice that surprisingly sounded steady. Elijah mumbled something unintelligible. Tiffany gave me that fake smile she had perfected over the years. "Good morning, Mother Sterling. Sleep well?" The question was pure formality. She didn't care about the answer. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down at the table in my own kitchen, feeling like an unwanted guest. I watched my son as he ate, studying his gestures, his indifference, the ease with which he had destroyed his mother the night before. There was no trace of guilt on his face, no discomfort about what he had said. To him, it had simply been a declaration of fact. "Elijah," I finally said. He looked up, irritated, as if my voice were a nuisance interrupting his morning peace. "Do you really mean what you said last night?" Tiffany stopped moving. The silence became dense, expectant. My son looked at me with that coldness I knew well and nodded slowly. "Every word," he replied without hesitation. "It was time things were made clear in this house." In this house. My house. The house I had bought with the money from my husband's life insurance policy. The house where I had raised this man who was now denying me as his mother. The house I had worked in for decades to create a home, only to become an intruder within it. "I understand," I simply said. And for the first time in years, I really did understand. There would be no reconciliation because there had never been a real relationship to reconcile. There would be no apology because he didn't feel he had done anything wrong. There would be no change because, to him, the situation was perfect as it was. I got up from the table and walked toward the living room. All the family photos I had collected over the years were there. Photos of Elijah as a baby, a child, a teenager. Photos of his graduation, his wedding, the birth of his daughter. In all those photos, I was present, smiling, proud, believing I was documenting the important moments of our family. But there was something I hadn't noticed before. In the most recent photos, the ones Tiffany had started putting up, I appeared less and less, and in the latest ones, I didn't appear at all. They had started writing a new family history, one in which I didn't exist. I picked up one of the oldest photos, where Elijah was about 3 years old and hugging me with that innocent smile only children have. At that time, I was his entire world. I was the person he ran to when he was hurt, the voice that comforted him when he had nightmares, the hands that fed him when he was sick. When exactly had I stopped being his mother? When had he made the decision to erase me from his heart? Maybe it was when he met Tiffany. She came from a wealthy family with parents who had college degrees and talked about things I didn't understand. Maybe my son had become ashamed of his working-class mother, of my calloused hands, of my simple way of speaking, of my lack of formal education. Maybe he had decided that I didn't fit into the life he wanted to build. Or maybe it had been a more gradual process. Perhaps every time I tried to participate in conversations about politics or the economy, and he made me feel ignorant. Every time I expressed my opinions and he dismissed them as things older people say. Every time I tried to give him advice and he told me that times had changed and that I didn't understand the modern world. Little by little, I had become a relic of the past, useful for babysitting Zoe when they needed a free sitter, useful for cooking when they had guests and wanted to impress them with authentic, home-cooked food, useful for cleaning the house when Tiffany was too busy with her social activities, but invisible for everything that truly mattered. I sat in my favorite armchair, the same one where I had rocked Elijah when he was a baby, where I had spent entire nights watching over his sleep when he had a fever. From there, I could see the entire living room, my entire house, all the memories I had built with so much love and care. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel nostalgia. I didn't feel the melancholy that usually invaded me when I remembered the good times. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. Clarity. A cold, crystalline clarity that showed me the situation exactly as it was. I had spent the last few years begging for love, begging for attention, begging for a place in a family that had already decided I didn't belong. I had accepted scraps of affection, settled for being tolerated instead of being loved, and justified every humiliation as a misunderstanding or a temporary situation. But last night, when Elijah uttered those devastating words, he had done me a favor without knowing it. He had freed me from the illusion. He had shown me that all the love, all the sacrifice, all the dedication I had invested in him for 45 years had meant nothing. And though it hurt more than words can express, it also gave me something I hadn't had in years. The truth. The truth was that I had been living a lie. The truth was that I had been fighting to keep together a family that no longer wanted me. The truth was that I had been sacrificing my dignity, my self-esteem, my very life for people who saw me as an obstacle. But the truth was also something else. A 71-year-old woman who had survived poverty, widowhood, and decades of hard work did not have to accept being treated like trash by anyone, not even her own son. The phone rang. It was the call I had been waiting for all morning. Mrs. Grace Sterling. The voice on the other end of the line was deep, professional, but warm. "This is David Beaumont. I'm a retired lawyer and I live in the Blue House on Oak Street. I urgently need to speak with you about some documents I found among my late partner's papers." My heart quickened. David Beaumont was the older gentleman who always greeted me courteously when I walked past his house during my morning strolls. A distinguished man with silver hair and elegant manners who had lived alone since his wife passed away a few years ago. We had never had a conversation beyond polite greetings. "Documents? I don't understand, Mr. Beaumont." My voice sounded confused, but something in his tone told me this call was important, more important than I could imagine. "Mrs. Sterling, I prefer not to discuss this over the phone. Could you receive me at your house this afternoon? I assure you, what I have to show you will change many things. It concerns your late husband and certain legal matters that I believe you are unaware of." The world seemed to stop around me. My husband had died 8 years ago, and since then, Elijah had taken care of all matters related to his estate and paperwork. He had always told me that my husband hadn't left anything of value, only debts that he had had to pay. That's why we had to sell a few things, and that's why he and his family had to move in with me to take care of me in my old age, according to him. "I'm home all afternoon," I replied, feeling an electric current run through my body. "You can come whenever you like." "Perfect. I'll be there at 3 o'clock sharp. And Mrs. Sterling, prepare yourself mentally to hear things that may surprise you. I'm bringing original documents, so there's no room for doubt." I hung up the phone with trembling hands. What documents? What legal matters? My husband had been a simple, hard-working man who had worked his fingers to the bone his entire life to give us a decent living. What could he have left that I didn't know about? The hours until 3 o'clock dragged on like centuries. Elijah and Tiffany had left after breakfast, taking Zoe to who knows where. Typical of them, not telling me their plans. I was left alone in the house, pacing back and forth, trying to imagine what Mr. Beaumont could want to tell me. At 3 o'clock precisely, I heard the doorbell ring. I opened the door and found David Beaumont dressed in an elegant gray suit, carrying a leather briefcase that looked heavy. His expression was serious, but gentle. "Mrs. Sterling, thank you for receiving me." He removed his hat with a gentlemanly gesture you don't often see in men today. "May we sit down? What I have to show you requires time and attention." I led him to the living room and offered him coffee, which he courteously accepted. While I prepared the cups in the kitchen, I could hear him opening his briefcase, organizing papers. The sound of the paper rustling made me more nervous with every second. When I returned with the coffee, he had several documents spread out on my coffee table. Official-looking documents, with seals, signatures, and letterheads from offices I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Sterling, my late partner, Arthur Vance, handled your husband's legal affairs for more than 20 years. When he passed away last year, I took charge of reviewing all his files to hand over pending cases to other colleagues. That's when I found this." He picked up one of the documents and handed it to me. It was a property deed. My heart stopped when I read the owner's name. Grace Sterling. It was the deed to my house, the house where we were sitting, but with one crucial difference. According to this document, I was the sole legal owner of the property. "I don't understand," I murmured, feeling as if the world was swaying beneath my feet. "Elijah told me the house was in his name. He told me Dad left it to him because I didn't understand legal paperwork." David slowly shook his head, his expression a mixture of sadness and indignation. "Mrs. Sterling, according to these documents, your husband left everything in your name. The house, a considerable savings account, even a small plot of land outside the city that apparently now has significant commercial value." I couldn't breathe. For 8 years, I had believed I was a burden on my son, that he had allowed me to stay in his house out of kindness. For 8 years, I had accepted being treated as a tolerated tenant in what turned out to be my own home. "But that's not all," David continued, picking up another document. "There is also a life insurance policy that was never collected, and here I have the bank statements for an account that is in your name, with automatic deposits that have been accumulating for years." My head was spinning. Automatic deposits? From what? Apparently, your husband had a small investment in a company that grew into something much larger. The dividends have been deposited into an account that is solely in your name, an account which, according to these records, you were never informed of. With trembling hands, I took the bank statement he offered me. The figure at the bottom took my breath away. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life, money that had been accumulating for years while I lived practically like a beggar in my own home. "How is it possible that Elijah didn't know about this?" I asked, though I was already beginning to suspect the answer. David looked at me with an expression that mixed compassion with something that looked like contained anger. "Mrs. Sterling, your son was present at the reading of the will. He knew all of this perfectly well. Moreover, according to these documents, he has been acting as your legal representative all these years, collecting the dividends and managing the properties on your behalf." My world collapsed. Not only had they lied to me for 8 years, not only had they made me believe I was a financial burden, my own son had been stealing from me. He had been living off my money in my house while making me feel like an intruder who depended on his charity. "Why are you telling me this now?" I managed to ask, my voice broken by shock. "Because my partner left very clear instructions before he died. If anything seemed suspicious to me in the handling of this case, I was to contact you directly. And when I reviewed the files, I realized that you had never signed any power of attorney, you had never authorized your son to manage your affairs, and apparently, you had never been informed of your true financial situation." David leaned forward. His voice became softer, but firm. "Mrs. Sterling, you have been the victim of fraud, a fraud perpetrated by your own son, and I have all the necessary documents right here to prove it." Tears began to roll down my cheeks, but they weren't tears of sadness. For the first time in years, they were tears of something close to relief. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't a burden. I wasn't a useless old woman who depended on the kindness of others. I was a woman who had been swindled, lied to, and manipulated by the people I trusted the most. "What can I do?" I asked, feeling something powerful awaken within me. David smiled for the first time since he had arrived. "We can do many things, Mrs. Sterling, many things. But first, I need to ask you, Are you prepared for your life to change completely? Are you ready to reclaim what belongs to you, regardless of the family consequences? I thought of Elijah's words the night before. I never considered you my mother. I thought of years of humiliation, exclusion, and being treated like trash in my own house. I thought of all the love I had given that had been mercilessly trampled. I'm ready, I replied, and my voice sounded steadier than it had in years. I'm more than ready. David completely opened his briefcase and began pulling out document after document, organizing them on my coffee table as if they were a puzzle that was finally going to be solved. Every piece of paper he placed in front of me was one more piece of the betrayal I had been living for 8 years without knowing it. Mrs. Sterling, the first thing we must do is establish a timeline of everything that has happened since your husband's death. I need you to tell me exactly what Elijah told you about the inheritance, what documents he showed you, what he made you sign. I poured myself another cup of coffee, my hands more stable now that the initial shocking revelation had passed. After the funeral, Elijah told me that Dad had left behind a lot of debt. He showed me some hospital bills, some loans he supposedly took out before he died. He told me we would have to sell a few things to pay for everything. David took notes in a notebook as I spoke. Do you remember exactly what they sold? Dad's car, some tools he had, his business ledgers. Elijah took care of everything. He said it was too complicated for me, that he would sort it out. The bitterness in my voice was palpable now that I understood what had really happened. And about the house, what did he specifically tell you about the property? He told me that Dad had put the house up as collateral for a large loan and that to keep from losing it, he had had to take over the debt. That's why the house had been transferred into his name, to protect it from creditors. Every word that came out of my mouth sounded more ridiculous now that I knew the truth. David shook his head as he searched through his documents. Here, I have the original deed to the house, signed by your husband 2 weeks before he died. As you can see, it specifically states that the property passes entirely to Grace Sterling, with the express condition that it can never be sold without your written consent and witnesses. I took the document with trembling hands. There was my husband's handwriting, his unmistakable signature, the words that protected my future. But then, how could he? Elijah forged your signature on several documents. I have copies here of papers where your name appears authorizing transfers, sales, and banking activities. But look at this. David put 2 signatures side by side. One was clearly mine. The other was a crude imitation. A forensic document examiner would immediately confirm that these signatures are false. The horror of what I was discovering took my breath away. Not only had I been lied to, but I had been systematically and criminally defrauded. How long has he been doing this? According to these records, it began immediately after the funeral. Here is the first withdrawal from the savings account your husband left you, $50,000, 2 months after the death. And here are the subsequent withdrawals, always with your supposed authorization. David showed me a sheet with a list of transactions that made me dizzy. Thousands and thousands of dollars withdrawn over 8 years, always with justifications that I now recalled. House repairs, mom's medical expenses, property maintenance, past due taxes. But this is the most serious, he continued, pulling out a new folder. Your son used the house as collateral to obtain loans in his name, loans that he took out but that are backed by your property. Look at these documents. 3 different loans totaling $200,000. I was speechless. That means that if he doesn't pay those loans, legally they could take the house from you. Even though you never authorized anything, even though you never benefited from that money, even though you didn't even know those loans existed. The magnitude of the betrayal was overwhelming. For 8 years, I had lived feeling guilty for being a burden on my son, when in reality, he had been living comfortably off my money and had put my house at risk for his own benefit. Mr. Beaumont, I said with a voice that sounded strangely calm, what do we need to do to fix this? David smiled with approval. I like your attitude, Mrs. Sterling. First, we need to go to the bank tomorrow morning so you can regain control of your accounts. Then we need to file a lawsuit for fraud and forgery of documents. And finally, we need to secure your properties before your son can do any more damage. How long will all that take? If we act fast, we can have court orders in 48 hours. The banks will have to freeze all accounts until the legal situation is resolved, and your son won't be able to make any more transactions without facing criminal charges. The sound of the front door interrupted our conversation. Elijah and Tiffany had returned. I heard their voices in the hallway, Zoe's laughter, the sound of shopping bags being set down. They had been spending money, my money, while I believed I was a burden to them. "What do we do now?" I whispered to David, pointing toward the door. "Now, we do nothing. You act normal. You don't mention this conversation. You don't confront anyone. We need the element of surprise on our side." David began putting the documents away quickly. "Tomorrow at 9 o'clock sharp, I'll be waiting for you at my office. I have a small office in my house where we can work without interruptions." "But they won't suspect anything is happening?" "Mrs. Sterling, for 8 years, you have been the perfect silent victim. One more day won't make a difference, except that now you know the truth." He stood up and shook my hand. "And the truth, Mrs. Sterling, is going to set you free." When David left, I remained seated in the living room, surrounded by the invisible evidence of years of betrayal. Elijah came in a few minutes later, carrying bags from an expensive department store. "Who was that leaving when we arrived?" he asked with that casual indifference that I now recognized as a mask. "Mr. Beaumont from the corner. He came to ask me about some plants in the garden." I lied with a surprising ease. Years of walking on eggshells had perfected my ability to avoid conflict. "That's weird. He's never come over before." There was a hint of suspicion in his voice that I didn't like. "Older neighbors sometimes get lonely," I replied, maintaining my neutral tone. He wanted advice about roses. Elijah seemed to accept the explanation and went up to his room with the purchases, but something in his expression told me I had to be very careful. My son was many things, but he wasn't stupid. If he began to suspect that something was changing, he could take steps to protect himself. That night, during dinner, I observed them with new eyes. Every bite they ate had been paid for with my money. Every item of clothing they wore had been purchased with my resources. My granddaughter's private school, the car they drove, the vacations they excluded me from, everything had been financed with the money my husband had left me for my security. "I'm going out early tomorrow," I announced casually. "I have a doctor's appointment." "A doctor's appointment?" Tiffany asked with fake concern. "Is it serious?" "Just a routine checkup. At my age, I have to monitor my health." Elijah didn't even look up from his plate. My health had never been a priority for him, unless it represented expenses that he would have to cover with my own money. After dinner, I went to my room early. I needed to process everything I had discovered and plan what came next. For the first time in 8 years, I went to bed knowing that I had power, that I had options, that I had the truth on my side. But I also knew that the next 48 hours were going to change everything forever. And although I was afraid of the confrontation that was coming, I also felt something I hadn't experienced in years: hope. The hope of reclaiming my dignity, my autonomy, my life. Elijah had believed he could erase me from history, turn me into a ghost in my own house, but he was about to discover that Grace Sterling was far from invisible. At 8 o'clock the next morning, I left the house with the excuse of my doctor's appointment. Elijah and Tiffany were having breakfast, completely oblivious to the hurricane that was about to break over their lives, which were perfectly constructed with lies and stolen money. For the first time in years, I could look at him without feeling guilty, without feeling like I owed them something. Now I knew that they were the ones who owed me everything. David's office was in a converted room of his house, filled with law books and meticulously organized files. He greeted me with fresh coffee and a smile that radiated confidence. On his desk, he already had all the documents we would need to destroy my son's lies. "Are you ready to begin?" he asked, indicating a chair in front of his desk. "More than ready," I replied. surprising myself with the firmness of my voice. The next 4 hours were the most productive of my life in years. We went to the bank, where I was identified as the true owner of the accounts Elijah had been managing. The manager, a young and efficient man, turned pale when David explained the situation and showed him the forged documents. "This is very serious," the manager murmured, reviewing the false signatures. "We need to report this to the authorities immediately and obviously freeze all accounts until the legal situation is resolved." "That's exactly what we want," David replied. "But we need Mrs. Sterling to have access to a reasonable amount for her personal expenses while everything is being sorted out." The bank granted me access to $10,000 immediately and blocked everything else. It was the first time in 8 years that I had my own money in my hands. Money that I could spend without having to ask anyone for permission, without having to justify every dollar as if it were an act of charity. Next, we went to the district attorney's office, where we filed the formal complaint for fraud and forgery of documents. The official who assisted us, a middle-aged woman with a severe expression, reviewed all the paperwork with professional attention. "Are you sure you want to proceed with this?" she asked me. "He is your son. Once we press these charges, there's no turning back. He could face time in prison." The question stopped me for a moment. Despite everything I had discovered, despite the betrayal and the lies, he was still my son, the child I had raised, the one I had given all my love and all my life to. But then I remembered his words. "I never considered you my mother." I remembered years of humiliation, exclusion, and being treated like trash in my own house. I remembered that he had multiple opportunities to tell me the truth, to treat me with dignity, to acknowledge that I was the true owner of everything he had been enjoying. "I'm sure," I replied. "My son decided that I wasn't his mother. Now I decide that he cannot continue to rob me without consequences." The official nodded and sealed the documents. "We will have the court orders ready for tomorrow morning. I recommend that you not be alone when they are executed. These situations can become very tense." When I returned home, it was almost 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Elijah was on his laptop in the living room, working from home, as he did twice a week. Tiffany had gone out with Zoe to her swimming lessons. It was the perfect time to begin the next phase of my plan. "Elijah," I said calmly, "I need to talk to you about something important." He looked up with an irritated expression. "I'm on an important video call right now." "End it," I said simply. "This can't wait." Something in my tone must have alerted him because he closed his laptop without protesting. I sat across from him on the sofa, studying his face, looking for any trace of the boy he had been, any sign of humanity, remorse, or love. "How was your doctor's appointment?" he asked, fulfilling the minimum formality. "It wasn't a doctor's appointment," I replied calmly. "I went to see a lawyer, and then I went to the bank, and then I went to file a complaint." The color drained from his face. His eyes hardened, but I also saw a flash of fear. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that I know everything, Elijah. I know this house is mine. I know the money you've been spending for 8 years is mine. I know you forged my signature to steal from me. I know you lied to me about everything since the day your father died." He remained silent for long seconds, processing my words, calculating his options. Finally, his expression changed to that familiar coldness. "And what do you plan to do with that information?" he asked, his voice as icy as his eyes. "I've already done it. The police are coming tomorrow with court orders. All the accounts are frozen, and you're going to have to face criminal charges." Elijah stood up abruptly, beginning to pace back and forth like a caged animal. "You're crazy if you think I'm going to let an ignorant old woman destroy everything I've built." "What you've built with my money," I corrected him, keeping my voice steady. "And I'm not an ignorant old woman, Elijah. I am your mother, even if you decided you don't consider me as such." "Exactly. You're not my mother. You're just the woman who birthed me. And now you're going to behave like the selfish person you always were, destroying your own family for money." The irony of his words was so absurd, it almost made me laugh. He, who had been robbing me for 8 years, was accusing me of being selfish for wanting to reclaim what was mine. "Elijah," I said, getting up to stand at his height, "I want you to know something. For years, you made me feel guilty for existing, for being a burden, for needing basic things like respect and dignity. But now I understand that you are the parasite in this relationship. You are the one who has been living off me without giving anything back." "Without giving anything back? I've given you a roof over your head." "My roof, Elijah. My house. My money. My inheritance. You haven't given me anything that wasn't already mine." He moved closer to me, trying to intimidate me with his physical presence, but I no longer felt afraid. After decades of walking on eggshells, of accepting scraps of affection, of allowing myself to be treated like trash, I had finally found my backbone. "Do you know what's going to happen when Tiffany finds out about this?" he threatened. "She's going to leave, and she's going to take your granddaughter, and you'll never see them again." "Tiffany can leave whenever she wants," I replied calmly, "but she'll have to leave my house. And as for my granddaughter, when she grows up, she'll understand that her grandmother had the dignity to defend herself when her own father betrayed her." Elijah looked at me with an expression that mixed hatred, desperation, and something that might have been respect. For the first time in years, he was seeing me as a real opponent, not a silent victim. "This isn't going to end here," he muttered through clenched teeth. "You're right," I replied. "This is just beginning. Tomorrow, when the police arrive, you're going to have to explain how you spent over $300,000 that weren't yours. You're going to have to explain why you forged my signature dozens of times. You're going to have to explain why you lied to your own mother for 8 years. Elijah walked toward the stairs, defeated, but still dangerous. "You'll regret this," he shouted before going up to his room. "No," I replied, though he could no longer hear me. "The only thing I regret is taking so long to discover who you truly are." That night, I prepared a special dinner. I brought out the fine china, the crystal glasses that had belonged to my mother, and the candles I kept for special occasions. When Tiffany returned with Zoe, she found the table set as if for a celebration. "What are we celebrating?" she asked curiously. "The truth," I simply replied. "Finally, we are going to know the whole truth." Dinner proceeded in a tense silence that could be cut with a knife. Elijah came downstairs with a somber expression, avoiding my gaze and barely touching the food on his plate. Tiffany tried to maintain a normal conversation with Zoe, but even she could sense that something in the atmosphere of the house had changed. My granddaughter, with that special intuition children have, ate in silence, watching the adults' faces with concern. When we finished the main course, I stood up to serve dessert. "Before we continue," I announced, placing my hands on the back of my chair, "I need to tell everyone something important." Tiffany frowned. Elijah kept his eyes glued to his plate. Zoe looked up, hoping it would be something good, something that would ease the tension she had been feeling. "This morning I went to see a lawyer," I began, my voice clear and firm. "I also went to the bank and to the district attorney's office, and I discovered things that are going to change everything in this family." Tiffany's eyes narrowed. "What kind of things, Mother Sterling?" "Things like this house is mine, legally mine, and always has been. Things like there are bank accounts in my name that contain hundreds of thousands of dollars that I never knew existed. Things like my husband left me a considerable inheritance that someone has been hiding from me for 8 years. My voice became harder with every word. "But the truth is that he has been living off my money, spending my inheritance, and using my house as collateral for loans I never authorized." Tiffany's fork slipped from her hands and fell onto the plate with a metallic clang that echoed in the silence. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that Elijah has lied to all of you for years. He made you believe that this house was his, that he was supporting his poor, helpless mother, that he was a generous son carrying the burden of caring for an old woman." Tiffany turned to Elijah with an expression of shock. "Is that true?" Elijah finally looked up, his face a mask of resentment and defiance. "It is true," he said, with a coldness that froze my blood. "And I would do it 1,000 times over. This woman never deserved that money. Dad made a mistake leaving everything to someone who doesn't understand the value of money, who doesn't know how to manage it, who would have wasted it on foolishness." "Foolishness," I repeated, feeling the anger begin to boil in my chest. "Like what foolishness, Elijah? Like giving money to every beggar who knocks on the door? Like buying expensive gifts for children who aren't even family? Like supporting half the neighborhood when they have problems?" His voice became more venomous. "Dad knew you were too sentimental, too naive. That's why he asked me to manage the finances." "That's a lie," I exploded, slamming my hand on the table with such force that the glasses trembled. "Your father never asked you to steal from me. Your father loved me and trusted me. You decided on your own that you had more right to my inheritance than I did." Tiffany seemed to be processing the information, her face cycling through shock, confusion, and something that looked like horror. "Elijah, have you really been stealing from your mother?" "I haven't stolen anything," he replied with arrogance. "I've administered resources that were being wasted by someone who doesn't have the mental capacity to handle them." The cruelty of his words momentarily took my breath away. He hadn't just stolen my money. Now he was trying to justify it by telling his wife that I was mentally incompetent. "Mental capacity?" I asked, my voice trembling with indignation. "Are you referring to the same mental capacity I used to raise you when your father worked double shifts? The same capacity I used to manage the household for 30 years without lacking anything? The same capacity that allowed me to work and save to pay for your education?" "That was before," Elijah muttered. "People get old. They lose capacity. It was my responsibility to protect the family assets. Protect them by spending them on luxury vacations that you excluded me from. Protect them by buying expensive clothes and new cars. Protect them by using them as collateral for personal loans." I pulled out one of the documents David had given me from my purse. "Do you want to explain to your wife what you used the $50,000 you withdrew in January for, or the $30,000 in March?" Tiffany took the document with trembling hands, reading the numbers, the dates, the amounts. Her face turned pale. "Elijah, this money. You told me you received a bonus at work." "And I did," he responded defensively. "A bonus I deserved for taking care of her all these years." "A bonus paid with my money," I shouted, no longer able to contain my fury. "A bonus you gave to yourself by robbing me of what your father left me for my security." Zoe began to cry, frightened by the yelling. Tiffany instinctively picked her up, but her gaze remained fixed on her husband with a look of growing horror. "How much?" Tiffany asked, her voice cracking. "How much money have you taken?" "Over $300,000 over these 8 years, I replied before Elijah could lie. "Plus the house, plus the land, plus the investments that continue to generate money and that he continues to collect in my name." Tiffany stood up abruptly, still holding Zoe. "I can't believe this. I can't believe you've lied to me for years, that you lied to your own mother, that you made us live like parasites." "We're not parasites," Elijah roared, standing up too. "I've worked all my life. I've supported this family." "You've done it with her money," Tiffany countered, her voice rising. "All this time, I thought we were building something together, that we were progressing through our own effort, but it turns out we've been living off money stolen from an elderly woman." "She's not just any elderly woman. She's my mother," Elijah yelled, as if that justified everything. "Exactly," I said, rising slowly, feeling all the power I had lost over the years return to me. "I am your mother, the woman who gave you life, who raised you, who sacrificed everything for you, and you decided to rob me, lie to me, humiliate me, and treat me like trash in my own house. And what did you think you were going to do with all that money?" Elijah attacked me. "Give it away? Waste it? Leave it to some church when you die?" "I planned to use it to live with dignity," I responded calmly. To not have to ask permission to buy my medicine, to not have to feel guilty about eating the food in my own house, to be able to give gifts to my granddaughter without being made to feel like a burden. Tiffany looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Mother Sterling, I didn't know any of this. If I had known—" "I know, honey," I told her softly. "You were also a victim of his lies. He was very clever, manipulating the truth, making you believe I was a burden, that you were doing me a favor." "The police are coming tomorrow," I announced calmly. "They are bringing court orders to review all the accounts, all the documents, and all the properties, and they are bringing arrest warrants." The color completely vanished from Elijah's face. "Arrest warrants, forgery of documents, fraud, misappropriation. These are serious crimes, Elijah. Crimes that can send you to prison for years." He collapsed into his chair, finally realizing that his world built on lies was crumbling hopelessly. Tiffany remained standing, holding Zoe, looking at her husband as if he were a stranger. "I want you to know something, Elijah," I said, my voice now soft but relentless. "You had 8 years to tell me the truth, 8 years to treat me with dignity, 8 years to include me in the family that I myself had been financing without knowing it. But you chose to humiliate me, exclude me, and rob me. You chose to tell me that you never considered me your mother." I approached him, still hunched over with his head in his hands. "Well, son, now your mother is going to teach you what it means to face the consequences of your actions, and it's going to be a lesson you'll never forget." At 8 o'clock the next morning, 3 official vehicles parked in front of my house. Police officers, agents from the district attorney's office, and a forensic accountant got out of the cars with documents and equipment to execute the court orders. I was waiting for them in the living room, dressed in my best clothes, feeling more dignified than I had in years. Elijah had spent the night silently packing his things. He hadn't slept. I could hear his desperate footsteps up and down the hallway. Tiffany had been crying until very late, not out of sadness for him, but out of shame for having been an unwilling accomplice to his lies for so long. When the doorbell rang, Elijah came down the stairs with a suitcase in each hand and an expression of complete defeat on his face. The officers entered professionally but firmly, showing the court orders and immediately starting to review documents and computers. "Elijah Sterling," the lead officer said, "you are under arrest for the crimes of forgery of documents, fraud, and misappropriation. You have the right to remain silent and to request an attorney." As they read him his rights, Elijah looked at me one last time. In his eyes, there was no longer coldness or arrogance. There was something close to remorse, but it was too late. He had had 8 years to feel remorse, 8 years to change his behavior, 8 years to treat me like the mother I had been to him. "Mom," he murmured as they put on the handcuffs, "this is going to destroy the family." "No, Elijah," I replied with a calmness that surprised me. "You destroyed the family years ago. I'm just rebuilding what's left of it." They took him away in silence. Tiffany was standing on the stairs with Zoe in her arms, watching as her husband was arrested for stealing from his own mother. The little girl didn't fully understand what was happening, but she knew something serious was going on. After Elijah was taken away, Tiffany slowly came downstairs, her eyes red from crying. "Mother Sterling," she began, her voice cracking. I need to apologize. I know I didn't know the truth, but I also know I should have seen the signs. I should have questioned why you were treated like you didn't belong in your own family." I went over to her and took her hands in mine. "Tiffany, you were also a victim of his lies. He was very clever, manipulating the truth, making you believe I was a burden, that you were doing me a favor." "But I participated in excluding you," she continued, tears rolling down her cheeks. "All those times we organized outings and didn't invite you, all those celebrations where we made you feel invisible. I knew it was wrong, but Elijah always had an explanation that sounded reasonable. The important thing is that now you know the truth," I told her gently. "The question is, what are you going to do with that truth?" Tiffany looked around the house. my house, where she had been living for years, believing she was the owner. "I don't know if I have the right to stay here. This is your house, and I've been part of the problem." "This house is big enough for all of us," I replied. "But I need to know that things are going to be different. I need to know that I will be treated with respect, that I will be included in the decisions that affect the family, that my granddaughter will grow up knowing who her grandmother really is." Tiffany nodded vigorously. "Yes, of course. More than that, I want my daughter to grow up seeing a strong woman who stood up for herself when it was necessary. I want her to learn from you what it means to have dignity." Over the following days, the house completely transformed. Without Elijah's toxic presence, without his constant manipulations and cruel coldness, the atmosphere became warmer, more honest, and more like a real home. Tiffany began including me in everything. She consulted me about meals, asked my opinion on Zoe's plans, and invited me into her phone conversations with her friends. For the first time in years, I felt like the family matriarch, not a tolerated tenant. Zoe, free from the constant tension that had characterized the house, began to grow closer to me. There were no longer nervous glances toward her father when she gave me a hug. There were no longer whispers about why Grandma couldn't go certain places with them. Now I could love her openly, and she could return that love without restrictions. "Grandma," she told me one afternoon while we were planting new flowers in the garden, "my teacher says old people are wise because they've lived many things. Are you wise?" "I'm learning to be," I replied, feeling the damp soil slip through my fingers. Sometimes wisdom comes late in life, but it's never too late to learn to value yourself. With the money I recovered, I was able to do things I hadn't done in decades. I remodeled the kitchen that had needed repairs for years. I bought new clothes, not because I needed them, but because I wanted them. I signed up for a senior ladies' book club at the neighborhood library. For the first time in years, I had friends, my own activities, and a life that went beyond being a mother or a grandmother. But perhaps the most important thing is that I finally understood something fundamental. Love cannot be unilateral forever. For decades, I had given unconditional love, hoping to receive even crumbs of affection in return. I had confused sacrifice with love, tolerance with patience, and abuse with the normal difficulties of family life. Now, I know that loving someone does not mean letting them destroy you. I know that being a mother does not mean accepting any treatment from your children. I know that age does not make a person disposable, and that the family that hurts you deserves no more consideration than the family that genuinely loves you. David, my lawyer and now my friend, comes to visit me every week. We drink coffee in the garden and talk about books, politics, and life. He has taught me that at 71, a woman can begin a new stage. She can reinvent herself. She can reclaim the space she deserves in the world. "Do you ever regret reporting your son?" he asked me recently as we watched Zoe run among the rose bushes. "Never," I replied without hesitation. "I regret taking so long to do it. I regret accepting for years to be treated as invisible. But reporting him was the bravest and most loving thing I could do." "Loving?" he asked curiously. "Yes, because I finally taught him that actions have consequences. I showed him that stealing is wrong, no matter who you do it to. I proved to him that lying and manipulating are not sustainable strategies for building a life. If I truly love him, I had an obligation to stop him before he hurt more people." Yesterday, I found a letter Elijah had written to me from jail. I didn't open it immediately. I left it on the dining room table for hours, wondering if I wanted to know what he had to say. Finally, with Tiffany sitting next to me for emotional support, I read it. It was a short letter full of justifications and self-pity. It said he had learned his lesson, that when he got out, everything would be different, and that he hoped we could be a family again. But nowhere in that letter was there a real apology. Nowhere did he acknowledge the harm he had caused me. Nowhere did he accept full responsibility for his actions. I folded the letter and put it away in a drawer. Maybe one day Elijah will truly understand what he did. Maybe one day he will be capable of a genuine apology. But I'm no longer putting my life on hold, waiting for that moment. I'm no longer sacrificing my present for the possibility of a future that may never come. This morning, while drinking my coffee and watching the news, I felt great sadness hearing about other older women who are being abused by their own families. Women who hand over their pensions to manipulative children, who are abandoned in nursing homes against their will, who are treated as useless burdens by the people who should love them most. To all those women, I want to say something. It's never too late to stand up for yourself. It's never too late to reclaim your dignity. It's never too late to say no more to abuse, no matter where it comes from. I was 71 when I decided to fight for my right to be treated with respect. I was 71 when I understood that true love doesn't require you to become invisible. I was 71 when I learned that the family that truly loves you would never make you feel like you are too much. If I could do it, any woman can do it. Age is not an excuse to accept mistreatment. Family is not a justification to tolerate abuse. Love is not a reason to sacrifice your dignity. Now, when I walk through my neighborhood, when I go to the market, when I participate in church activities, I do it with my head held high. I am no longer the woman who has to ask permission to exist. I am Grace Sterling, a woman who defended herself when necessary, who reclaimed what was hers, who chose her own dignity over the comfort of others. And every night when I lie down in my bed, in my house, surrounded by the people who genuinely love me, I give thanks for having found the courage to change my story. Because at the end of the day, no one can erase a woman from her own life unless she allows it. And I, Grace Sterling, will never allow it again. Did you like my story, and which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.